Well, let's bring in Dr. Jakkie Cilliers, the founder of the Institute for Security Studies, to share his perspective on the arrests, the court appearances, and the prospects for the neutralising of similar violent and future events in the province of KZN. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time, Jakkie. 3,000 Rand bail each. Should they have been given bail, given the seriousness of the crimes they're alleged to have committed?
Well, I think that proving the kind of the issues of conspiracy are going to be challenging, and we don't know what proof the police have on this issue. So I would just defer to the opinion of the court. I think we're all glad that something has happened, that 20 people have been arrested with an apparent another 65 that may appear. So I think this is good news. We're seeing some progress. But I do think we must not get too carried away with seeing a massive conspiracy. I think that events of July last year were instigated, but they also got out of hand and gained a momentum of their own. And it's going to be very difficult to draw a clear line between what eventually happened and to prove that the intent of those 20 or eventually 85 people were to cause the kind of damage that eventually resulted.
That's so interesting. Let's just stay with that thought for a moment. I mean, is there precedent in law for what we might call, a catalytic event leading to unintended consequences, so to speak? I mean, if that wasn't the, intent, and the court can't prove it was the intent for it to gain momentum in the way that it did, is there precedent that they can be held responsible for everything related to a trigger event?
Very, very difficult. Very difficult. It's like during apartheid, trying to hold a police man or woman in special branch to tie it down to what P.W. Botha or the Minister of Police at the time had informed. And we saw where that happened. It went nowhere. So I think it's going to be very difficult. I don't see you being able easily in a court of law with a very high threshold of proof that is required in South Africa beyond reasonable doubt, that will be easily crossed.
Well, let's just stick to the housekeeping issues then. So we saw the charges: conspiracy, incitement to commit arson, incitement to commit violence. And the question has been raised in the past, even in the absence of people going to court and actually being arrested as suspects. Are these sufficient charges given the anarchic and, one would say, treasonable nature of the violence?
Yeah. In legal matters, you go on what you have evidence on. You may remember the stories of big kingpins that are eventually brought to justice on, let's say, tax evasion. And I think we're going to find the same here. And that is, what is it that can be proven beyond reasonable doubt? And that may be very different to what you or I would like them to be brought to court on. So I think we need to be glad that something has happened, but I think we need to temper our expectations about what can be proven beyond reasonable doubt in a court of law. The threshold is very high.
And this is where sagacity prevails over emotion, I suppose, because, a lot of people are looking to the court, looking at these arrests, thinking, OK, great, the legal book, as it were, is going to be thrown at these individuals, and in some way it'll serve as a deterrent against future similar crimes or events happening in the province. Given what you're saying and the difficulty in really pinning an individual down to a particular act, the evidence has got to be super solid, and it's got to be sort of, counter-corroborative. Do you believe that this is going to be the moment that really brings us that opportunity to say, don't do this because look at the consequences?
No, I think we will only get there if we establish a culture of accountability in South Africa and a demonstration that with every incident that there will be consequences. We have established a challenge in that regard in South Africa, and government is trying to turn that around. Police, the whole criminal justice system is trying to turn that around. But that will take time, and it will take many of these kind of events. So in general, I think the South African public will probably be slightly disappointed by what is going to follow, and by the success or the limited success that may follow. But we've seen action. We've seen a coordinated campaign by the security agencies across provinces to arrest these people, bring them to book. That's progress. But I wouldn't hold my breath that we are going to either find the real instigators behind this, or that we'll be able even to prove that, as we would all suspect, that a few political senior people, supporters of Jacob Zuma, were somehow responsible and that we can track it to them. The fact of creating a link, for example, between a tweet and action, almost impossible to create.
Yeah, and it really then leads me to the next question, that during testimony at the South African Human Rights Commission into the violence, one digital expert said that former President Jacob Zuma's daughter had engaged in the most celebratory posts at the height of the violence. We heard from police that they are investigating after an affidavit was deposed against Dudu Zuma Sambudla. What grounds would police have to establish to make a credible charge against her?
Well, they have to establish a clear link between her celebratory text and the act of violence, and I think that would be very difficult to do. I can't see that being possible. But these people, what we do need to establish in South Africa is that this kind of commentary, we also see that with the kind of racism we see with many of our political parties lately. We shouldn't be tolerating this kind of attitude, and hopefully the Human Rights Commission and others can play a bigger role in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, you've answered in the first two answers, I think, my next question, and indeed the next two questions, which were going to be in answering why the arrest had taken this long. The head of the Hawks in KwaZulu-Natal, Major General Lesetja Sonono, said that there had been complexities, and essentially what they wanted to do was to ensure that they had a strong and winnable case. In view of what you've already answered in terms of your assessment of the way the criminal case is being presented, it's likely that it's going to take a couple of different turns, and a new methodology in investigating would have to be brought to bear. Share with us your perspective on, what's happening in the digital space, and whether this is kind of like new territory for, agencies like the Hawks to prosecute in.
I don't think it's actually new territory, because the burden of proof remains unchanged. So what is true is that remarks that people had made digitally can be traced, and you can look at how tweets were retweeted, posted, and from where they were done, at what time. And that gives you a kind of circumstantial evidence that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have. But finding a relationship, a causal relationship between, for example, a tweet, celebratory tweet, for example, and subsequent action, very difficult. Celebration happens afterwards. Where are the instructions? And did those instructions have consequences? Proving that would be very difficult.
Dr. Jakkie Cilliers, thank you very much for your sobering assessment of developments in court and how we should temper our expectations for the outcome of this particular case or these cases. Jakkie Cilliers is the founder of the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you very much for talking to us tonight.